Welcome to my real retro texture creation tutorial, where I will show you the whole process from scratch, how to create a actual retro style texture that is pretty similar, if not exactly the same end result that you would see in a retro game. And I'm talking about PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2 era. This is something that I learned when I was in college. My professor, he worked on some PlayStation 2 titles and he showed us how to create these textures with limited indexed color tables and all that sort of thing. So we'll get into that later. And by the end, we should have a pixelated retro texture. And like I said, I'm starting from scratch. So here's a photo I took of this stone foundation that we found out in the woods, which was pretty cool. So to begin, I'm going to create a work file that's going to be full resolution. And then afterwards, we're going to crunch it all down because there's a lot of work to be done still. We're going to make this tileable. Of course, it has to be square. And there's some changes that I need to make, like up here, there's some light leaking here. So for starters, I'm just going to duplicate this layer here and just make a copy in case I want to make any changes to that. That's just so I don't have to be destructive while I work. So to start, I want to make this square. So I'm going to take the width and make it match the height here. Hit OK, just proceed. That's going to crop out the edges. If I was not doing the tutorial and I was making a real asset, I would just make sure it was cropping a portion that I really liked. We're just going to have to see what this turns out looking like at the end, but usually you want to find a spot in your texture that looks nice. Next, I guess I'm going to get rid of this light leak up here. I don't know if it's noticeable in the actual video, but there's like a blue light leak here because I just took this with my phone camera. The way I would handle that is by creating a gradient, and I want it to be kind of a greenish color because I'm going to try to cancel out this blue. So I'm just going to grab a color from the bottom here because in the end you want it to match the up and the bottom. You actually want all sides to match, but we'll get into that after. So I will create a gradient in a new layer here. Just make sure that it's on the basic color to transparency here. And then I'm going to drag from the top and try to cover up as much of that blue as I can. Let's see how this works. I haven't done this yet. This hasn't been trial run at all. So we're just going to see. And I'm going to change this blending option to color. Let's see how that looks. Okay, that's pretty good. I'm going to lower I don't know if that's exactly what I want here. Let's try a different blending mode. Maybe multiply. Just trying to get the top to match the bottom. Hard light actually looks pretty good. I'm going to stick with hard light there. So that's my gradient coming from the top to the middle about, and getting rid of that blue light leak there. Let's see if I can increase the opacity a little bit more. That's pretty good. You'll spend more time with this than me. This is just for example purposes, but maybe there's a blending option that works better than that. It's starting to flatten out the colors here. Like we're not getting a lot of variation like we do down here. So that might be something you want to address with a different blending option, but we're going to move on for now. The next thing, I'm going to flatten this. So now I have a whole layer that's just a flattened version of all these edits here. And I'm going to try to make this tile. So let me actually look at the image size here. So it's 3024. So we want whatever the resolution, the vertical or horizontal resolution, and we want to just divide it by 2. And so 1512, we're going to use to offset this layer because we're going to try to tile this now. So filter, I think it's in others, offset. So we want to make each of these 1512. Okay. And we can see that we have this 4-paneled division here. And that's just because it's tiling it for us in this little space. So we want to fix all the tiling issues right now, and then we'll put it back to where it was before. And hopefully that'll help it tile. I can already tell right now, there's a lot of like variation here. I might want to go back and change the, like I said, the gradient overlay that we had just to make it match a little better because it's quite light over here and then it's dark on the bottom. So that's going to be tougher to make it mirror. But since we're just making a tutorial and I can't like perfect everything as we go along or I'll go crazy, we're just going to work with this and see how we get. And it's also worth keeping in mind that we're going to make this a tiny like 128 by 128 texture in the end. So some of these things might not even matter that much, but it's good to get a nice tileable texture to work from. That way the end result is all the better. So what I would do from here, I'm not super familiar with like the AI tools and stuff in Photoshop now, but we can just use the spot healing brush, make it bigger, maybe make it softer. Let's see, make it a little softer. And I'm just going to run across these lines here because we have these pretty distinct lines that we want to get rid of. So I'm going to draw over that and just see what it comes up with. And I think that'll do. It's not great. There's a lot of like stones that shouldn't exist in there. But I'm just going to go with it because, like I said, tutorial. I'll go crazy if I get too perfectionist about everything. So there, we have an okay tiling happening there. It's a little muddy, like there aren't distinct stones happening here, but I bet you it won't be noticeable in the final thing. And I definitely recommend you going into more detail, maybe not just going across the whole thing at once, but going in on a more granular level, like for example, each of these overlapping stones and trying to get them to look nice with a smaller brush like this, and see how you manage with that. I think you could definitely spend a little more time than I am with this one swath up the center and across the center there. So I'm okay with that for now. You might have noticed that I didn't take the spot healing brush all the way to the edges, and that's just because from this point of view, there's no way to actually tile those parts of it. We can get this center point here, but there's not enough information, or there's no way to mirror across or tile the changes that we make here. So we're gonna have to shift it over again to make those changes here in the center. And to do that, we go back up to this offset filter, and you'll see that the entries from before are still here. So we just want to replace one of them with 0, and that'll bring over those edge points that connect into the center. So now we can actually do some work on them. So I'm gonna hit OK, and I'll just do a quick edit there. I'm not gonna complain too much about the quality. That's actually not too bad. You can see kind of like 2 distinct stones there. That's what I would hope for with the other edits, but I'm just trying to do this quick. I don't want to obsess over it, but I definitely recommend taking your time with these edits and maybe get in a little more granular. And so for that next part, we're going to go back to the offset tool. And this time we want to shift it over just horizontally. So we'll leave the values as they are, but I'll add 1512 here, and it'll push over to the right this texture. So we're seeing that point there, the horizontal meeting point that we couldn't reach before here in the center. But it actually doesn't look too bad here. I guess just for the sake of it, I'll just put a little swatch over there. Oh no, that looks bad. I don't know. It doesn't look too bad here. Maybe I'll get rid of that weird seam. I don't know. I don't know what I can do here. That's fine. So I'll just leave it at that. There's no like distinct seam anymore running across there, the horizon line, and also the vertical line as well. So we're going to put it back to the way it was before. And to do that, we just need to put horizontal to 0. Hit OK. And to see your edits, you can actually turn on and off this layer. And you can see that all around the edge, we kind of have a border of adjusted pixels there. And so, yeah, that should tile okay. I would also, I guess we can do this as well. Take some elements here that stand out and remove them, like this leaf. We don't necessarily need that, because if that starts to tile, it'll be really noticeable. So we'll get rid of these leaves, just to clean up the texture a little bit. You know, I could do a whole video about how to clean up textures and make these textures look nice. I do cover a lot of that stuff in my other tutorial about making game assets. We do that quickly, so maybe that's something that would be interesting to look at. But for now, this looks pretty good. I actually think that the camera added a little bit of a fisheye effect to this texture, so maybe if I can find the filter, it's probably in distort. I can maybe fix that fisheye. Ripple, shear, spherize, maybe that'll help. Yeah, so I'm actually just going to make a subtle adjustment here. Let's see if this is like too much. I'm going to go backwards with it. So I'm going to go backwards maybe like 10. Let's see what that looks like. That's fine. I guess that's okay. I think that makes it nicer. We can always also test if it's still tiling by doing the offset again, but I'm pretty confident it didn't adjust the edge pixels there, so it should be tiling just fine. But I'm happier with that now that stone in the middle isn't so big. I think that'll tile a little better now. So now that we have this nice tiling texture, I'm going to convert it to a smart object so I can scale it down to the size that we want, which I think I'm going to go with 128 by 128. That's a nice texture size for a retro environmental tile like this. So I'm going to select all my layers, right click them, and convert to smart object. And that way I can scale this down over here, and if I ever want to make edits to the texture itself, I can just double click in the smart object and make my edits in here. And that'll be all nice for kind of future-proofing the file if I ever want to make changes. I'm not stuck with a low-resolution file. So with that all set, I'm going to go to image size and set our width and height to 128. And from here, you can play around with the different scaling methods and the sampling methods, I suppose, to get different levels of clarity or softness or whatever you're after. I think if you use nearest neighbor, you'll get a pretty crunchy, crispy looking texture. It actually has like things in parentheses here, smoother gradients, sharper for reduction, let's see, versus automatic. It might just be using that if I set to automatic. I'm just going to set it for automatic for now, but you can play around with those things. So we'll hit OK, and we'll get this teeny tiny little texture here. And since we're using a smart object, I do want to warn that I believe the edge pixel kind of gets blurred sometimes. So what I usually do is I add a solid color layer underneath our actual layer here. So if we switch that on and off, yeah, you can kind of see like up in the corner here that there's like transparent pixels there. And that's, I don't know how to fix that. Maybe if we use nearest neighbor, it would be better. But I think that's just because we're using a smart object. So having that there will just get rid of those pixels. And if you want to make it a little more neutral, you can set it to a gray or something. So we can put it at a middle gray, which I believe is 127 or 128. That's like the halfway point between 255. So now we have our texture here, and it auto pass as a retro texture already, right? Because it's all pixelated and jaggy and stuff. But to actually do this properly, we have to index these colors, because right now we're using, you know, all the colors, but we want to limit them so that they fit within our budget. I'm going to use budget in quotes here because I think modern games don't really have a color budget, whereas games of the past, they had, you know, 16-bit or whatever, and the textures all had to be 16 colors or less, you know, or in a certain range. So, but as far as we're concerned, this process of limiting the colors will actually result in a more optimized texture, because we can have a texture that looks pretty decent, you know, a texture that looks just like this with some dithering maybe, but it'll be a much more consistent file size since we're going to actually have control over the pixels themselves. So at this point, before we actually get into the indexing, I recommend saving this file, and this can be like your work file. So I'm going to save as, and for now, I'm just going to put it on my desktop, because the next step is destructive. When you index the colors, it will flatten everything. So if you ever want to make changes, you'll change the work file and you'll have to redo your color indexing afterwards. As far as I know, maybe that's not true anymore, but to the best of my understanding, this is going to flatten everything and you'll be working with just a single layer from now on. So let's cut to the chase, and I will go up into image and change the image mode to index color. So we're working with RGB right now, but now we want to use index color. And you'll get a warning that says merge the layers, and you just hit OK. And in this window, you get our index color window. We can choose the palette that it's going to use, and we'll just use, you know, the regular color spectrum. And we'll limit it to, for this example, 16 colors. You can play around with this if you want. Let's see what this is. Force. Okay, so you can force to black and white. You can mess with these settings. We're not going to force anything. There's other options here. What is this? I honestly don't know what this is. We're going to skip that. But the dither, this is probably the most important thing here, aside from the color, the amount of colors, is the dithering method you want to use. And I usually select pattern because it's kind of like aesthetically nice, but you can play around with what diffusion looks like and what noise looks like. I like pattern because it actually creates a pattern, just like you'd expect. And so I'll leave it there, and then I will hit OK. And now our colors have been indexed, and I'll show you what that means and what kind of power that gives us over the texture. So if we go back into image mode, we'll see that we have a new option available to us, which is called the color table. And so we'll click that. And now you can see our color table shows us all the colors in the texture. We chose 16 colors, so we see a row of 16 here, I believe. And we have the unique ability to click in on any of these colors and adjust them with the spectrum picker, or whatever it's called. So something that you often see in older games or just in general with processing images is you want to get rid of some of the super dark areas and replace them with a nicer tone that kind of reads better on screen. So I'm going to go into these darker swatches here. I'll just go darkest to least darkest and change the color. And you should be able to see, hopefully you can see, let me just do something extreme. It's taking every pixel on this texture that are in that swatch or in that color and changing them to my liking. So what I probably want to do is maybe go into like a deep blue instead of using true black or anything like that, which is kind of what it was before. And I'm going to change it to this nice blue color. And so that's okay for now. I'm going to copy that hex code there for the color just so I have it, and then bring it over into this other swatch here. Just paste that. And that was a little lighter, so I'm going to actually bring that up just a touch, but it's still kind of the same hue. Hit OK. And then I'll go over here to this other swatch, do the same thing, paste that in there, and then bring it up even more because it was a bit lighter. And so now we have, I mean, that's kind of an extreme example, right? That might be a little too vibrant for the shadows, but I can always go back in here, darken it up. And you can even do the same with highlights. So maybe I can take these highlights and make them a little darker or something. Maybe I didn't like the highlights. Maybe I can make them match the other colors that were on there. Maybe I wanted to make them even stronger. So you have full control over these colors. And since there's only 16 of them, it's actually pretty simple just to jump into the swatches and make adjustments as you wish. You can also, if you're really creative, you can dive into these colors and make them extreme, you can make like lavas in between if there's a light glowing from underneath the rocks or something. So at this point, you kind of have the power to do whatever you want with these different swatches on this texture. So just for a couple things that you might like to know while you're working with the color table is there's a couple hotkeys and different functionalities that are kind of hidden in here. And I'll just brush over a couple of them that I know right now. I think there's probably documentation on the color table you could look into on Adobe's actual website, but for now, I'll leave you with a couple of things here. Basically, say you made some adjustments that you're not really happy with. You can always hold down the Alt key, and you'll see that the cancel button actually changes to a reset button. And if you click that, you'll get back your original swatch. Another thing you can do is you can actually add gradients. So say you have a range here that you'd like to change the color of. You can select the range and change it as a gradient. So it's kind of hard to explain, but let me show you. So for example, let's see. We have this range here that kind of goes from dark to light. So we can select all of these and it'll first prompt you to change that first selection. So let's say we want this gradient to be, I don't know, green, I guess. We can have it go from this color green, which is, I guess I'm going to make it like a deeper green, and then we'll hit OK. And then it'll prompt us with another window and we can make this a lighter green. And you'll see that this actually adds a gradient across that selection that we made. You can make selections maybe on pre-existing gradients, like we have a dark to light one over here in the corner, and you can edit them kind of wholesale like that with the color picker. And so we're left with a nice gradient like that. The last thing is actually saving and loading these color tables. So you can actually save out these tables. So say you have something like a color scheme that's kind of nice. You might like to reuse it on a similar texture elsewhere. You can save it and it'll save somewhere on your computer as a .act. So that's just a Adobe color table file, I'm guessing. And you can save that wherever you like. And then next time you create a color table out of a different texture, you can then load that from wherever it was on your computer. So yeah, that's the color picker. I'm just going to hit OK here. You can go crazy with that. I definitely think there's a whole lot of possibility for creating really cool textures, really cool kind of pixelated color grading on your textures this way, like changing the shadows, changing the highlights, changing the colors of your whole texture overall. But yeah, at the end of the day, you will be left with a stripped down texture and you can use that in your game and it should work out nicely. I guess as far as the workflow is concerned, I would save this file as a separate file. So I do a file save as, and then like wherever you had saved your work file before, I would just create a work file branch, so to speak, and call this one like index or something and save that. And that way you have this to work from. If you ever want to change the color table again, you can do that here. And also, if you wanted to start from the beginning, you can always load your original work file here and work from that. So I guess one example would be if you wanted to go from 16 colors to 32 colors instead, you can then go back to this work file, change the mode to index color again, and then make this 32 instead. So you can get a little more color depth here. The 16-bit one looked a little too green, I guess, like it decided on some green colors. I mean, it is a prominently green texture, but with some more colors, you can get better gradients with the shadows and stuff like that. So I'll hit OK, and I can show you just to show you. The color table now will contain twice as many pixels. And whenever you save it, it ought to be twice as big as the 16 color image, or some sort of multiplication to that extent. When you're dealing with these stripped down indexed color textures, you definitely get the control over the actual size of the textures. And so you can mess around and see how your textures are scaling as far as the actual storage is concerned for your project. Maybe not a big concern with modern games, but if you're interested, that's kind of why these sorts of things were necessary in older projects and older games, is because you could have really finite control over the actual size of your textures. So I think there's something to do with like the resolution. If it's 128 by 128 and you have 16 colors, I believe there's some math that you can do to actually figure out the actual size of the texture, regardless of the content of the texture. So you can have a lot of control that way. So yeah, I think that's as much as I can really get into index color textures and color tables and, color swatches and dithering and all that stuff. So I think at this point you have a pretty good idea of what it takes to create an authentic retro texture that would actually be functional in a retro game. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this. Hopefully it was informative. If you have any questions or concerns or anything like that, you ought to be able to get a hold of me through social media or just leaving a comment or anything like that. So yeah, just let me know. Hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully you found it interesting. I definitely have fun making these tutorials. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you around. Bye.